The air in the cramped, cinderblock room at Blackwood Ridge Asylum always tasted the same, metallic, sterile, and cold. For 10 years, this oppressive stillness had been the forge where Alara Thorne had hammered her prodigious, chaotic violence into a weapon of absolute precision. Her diagnosis, intermittent explosive disorder, had been their cage, her unrelenting discipline had been her escape route. Today, the scent was different. Today, it carried a hint of Serafina. My twin sister, Serafina Evans, though legally still Thorne, sat on the narrow cot, dressed in my shapeless, gray institutional shift, her delicate hands trembling as she adjusted the heavy silver ring that was my only permitted jewelry. She was terrified, but beneath the terror, a fragile hope was beginning to bloom. "Alara," Serafina whispered, her voice barely audible, identical to mine yet lacking the hard edge of command. "Are you absolutely certain about this? If they discover the switch, they will lock you away forever." "And what if I fail?" I stood before her, dressed in the cheap, stained clothes she had smuggled in, Serafina's clothes, imbued with the smell of poverty and perpetual fear. I smoothed the rough fabric of my cotton blouse. "You will not fail, Serafina. You have one job: to rest. To heal, to allow the stillness here to undo the damage Victor inflicted. Dr. Albright is predictable. As long as you maintain my silence and discipline, you are safer here than in that house." I placed my hands on her shoulders, forcing her to meet my gaze. "I am going to that house not to escape my prison, but to destroy yours. Your body remembers 10 years of torture, mine remembers 10 years of conditioning. Victor Thorne only preys on weakness. He will find none in me." Serafina swallowed, tears filling her eyes. "But he is so strong, Alara, he is so violent. Strength is predictable, violence is chaotic. I am neither, I am structure," I stated, my voice a low, immutable promise. "I will neutralize the threat. I will secure Skylar. I will gather the evidence. And when the work is done, I will return. You will then use the evidence and your legal counsel to walk out of this place as Serafina Evans, a free woman. Is the burner phone charged?" "Yes. It's hidden in the lining of the suitcase you brought." "Good. Now look at me, Serafina. You are Alara. Be silent, be compliant, be invisible, rest." A guard's heavy footsteps echoed outside the isolation corridor. Our time was up. Serafina nodded, her tears finally overflowing. She squeezed my hand, a silent exchange of our two broken lives. I walked out of Blackwood Ridge, moving with Serafina's slight, hesitant gait, adopting her worried gaze and submissive posture. No one noticed the difference. To them, patient 442 was just a file number. The irony was palpable. I, the confined lunatic, was walking into freedom, while my abused, sane sister was walking into safety. The Thorne house on the east side was a monument to domestic decay. It smelled of stale beer, burnt grease, and the perpetual, corrosive acid of fear. I arrived late in the evening, slipping in through the back door, the cheap lock yielding instantly to a hairpin and the precision of my fingers. 3 figures define the toxic ecosystem. Victor Thorne, a brute whose bulk was his primary weapon; Matriarch Thorne, Victor's mother, whose verbal cruelty was the structural support of his violence; and Trisha, Victor's sister, a petty tyrant fueled by envy and malice. I found Skylar first. My 4-year-old niece was huddled under a threadbare blanket in a corner of the living room, clutching a dirty, threadbare stuffed rabbit. Her eyes were wide, dark pools of residual terror, the kind that never fully dissipates. She looked at me, her mother, with the familiar caution of a victim. I knelt before her. I did not rush. I did not touch. "Skylar," I whispered, using a tone softer than any I had used in a decade. "Everything is going to be quiet now. You are safe, I promise." I then went into the kitchen. Victor was slouched at the table, a 6-pack of cheap beer his constant companion. The moment he saw me, the rage he carried from a bad day at the docks boiled over. "There you are, you useless tramp," Victor slurred, his face contorted into a mask of aggressive self-pity. "Where the hell were you? I needed a ride and you were nowhere. Give me your purse, I need $50 for the game." He lunged across the small table, his hand outstretched. This was the moment of truth. Serafina would have flinched, trembled, and given him the money. I did the opposite. I met his lunge not with defense but with clinical counteraggression. His large, fleshy hand reached toward my neck. My hand shot out, grabbing his forearm just above the elbow. I did not squeeze, I applied a highly specific twisting torque, isolating the pressure point that controls the radial nerve. Victor's aggressive roar dissolved into a sudden, high-pitched yelp of pure, agonizing shock. All his strength vanished in an instant, replaced by searing, debilitating pain that ran from his shoulder to his fingertips. What the hell are you doing?" he gasped, his face draining of color. He was paralyzed, unable to move his arm, yet rooted in place by the unfamiliar source of the attack. I held him there, leaning in close, forcing him to look into my eyes. My voice was a low, guttural command, utterly stripped of emotion. "You will never, under any circumstances, lay a hand on me or Skylar again. You will not raise your voice. You will not demand money. You will obey me. Your strength is over, Victor. My reign begins now." I released the nerve and his arm flopped onto the table, temporarily useless. He scrambled backward, falling out of the chair, staring at me with the absolute, profound terror of a predator who has suddenly encountered a superior, unknown species. Matriarch Thorne and Trisha burst in, roused by the unfamiliar sound of Victor's distress. They saw him sprawled on the floor and me standing over him, utterly calm, my face an impenetrable mask. "Victor, what did you do, you idiot?" Matriarch Thorne shrieked at me. I turned my head slowly toward the matriarch. "He learned a lesson. Now you will learn yours. You will clean this kitchen. You will speak only when spoken to, and you will look at me only with respect. If you challenge me, I will ensure the pain he felt is a minor discomfort compared to what you will experience." The matriarch, her face a mixture of confusion and shock, paused. She saw the Victor she knew, the dominant, brutal force, reduced to a shivering, whimpering mess. She saw the Serafina she knew, the tearful, submissive victim, replaced by a chilling, quiet certainty. They retreated, not out of fear of physical strength, but out of fear of the unpredictable, organized, and absolute fury that radiated from me. I retrieved the small, secure burner phone from the lining of the suitcase. My first mission was complete: establish immediate, undeniable dominance and safety. The real work, the strategic dismantlement, was about to begin. I needed evidence, and I needed to ensure that every moment of the next few weeks would be meticulously documented, creating a trail of irrefutable proof of their historical violence and my manufactured madness. I walked back to the living room and found Skylar still watching, her eyes wide. She wasn't terrified of me, she was fascinated. I knelt down and offered her a small, genuine smile. "It's okay, little one," I whispered. "Go back to sleep." The house was quiet. The fear was gone, only the cold, clean strategy remained. The first 3 days of my occupation were dedicated to establishing control and gathering irrefutable proof. The constant state of terror I enforced was necessary to prevent any counteraggression and to make them witnesses, not conspirators, in my liberation plan. I systematically dismantled the small hierarchies of abuse. Victor was forced to work double shifts at the docks and his wages were confiscated, save for bus fare and cheap liquor. He slept on the bathroom floor. Matriarch Thorne and Trisha were put on a rigorous cleaning schedule. Any defiance, a sideways glance, a muttered insult, was met with an immediate, non-damaging but excruciating pressure point lock, a specialized technique I had perfected to maximize agony with minimal visible bruising. They quickly learned that resistance was futile and painful. They began to hate me, but they feared the new Serafina more than they hated the old one. The physical evidence was paramount. On the third day, I used Serafina's worn, old state ID to register at a small neighborhood clinic under her name, claiming I had tripped down the stairs. I presented the doctor with a map of hell. Serafina's arms, chest, and torso, covered in fresh and faded bruising, the before evidence collected by the actual Serafina before the switch. I then showed the doctor the faint, fading 5-finger mark on Skylar's cheek, explaining with an Academy Award-winning performance of terror and shame that Victor had been drunk and accidentally struck the child. "I need help," I choked out, tears streaming down my face, a perfect replication of my sister's defeated fragility. "I can't leave him, he will find me, but I can't let him hurt my daughter anymore." The doctor, a weary but ethical man, immediately recognized the signs of severe domestic abuse and child endangerment. He photographed the injuries on both Skylar and myself, filling out the mandated Child Protective Services (CPS) report and a full police referral. I had the accidental fall story ready, insisting I would be killed if I reported my husband directly, but the doctor's duty was clear. "Mrs. Thorne," the doctor stated gravely, handing me copies of the official medical reports complete with photographs and clinic letterhead. "This is mandatory. We are contacting CPS and the police right now. They will prioritize your safety and your daughter's." This was the core evidence I needed, an objective, state-verified account of severe abuse recorded under Serafina's identity. The narrative was simple. The victim was too terrified to press charges but was now desperately seeking help. My next step was to plant the videos. I had placed small, high-definition cameras in the living room and kitchen, the primary zones of abuse during the first night. I had hours of footage, but I only needed 3 clips: Victor's drunken rages, Matriarch Thorne dumping the food, and Trisha verbally abusing Skylar. I downloaded the clips onto a secure, encrypted drive and sent an anonymous email, using a public library Wi-Fi, to a burner email account I knew Serafina and her future lawyer could access. The subject line was chillingly simple: proof. On the 5th day of my occupation, the final, crucial trap was set. I gathered the Thorne family in the living room. Victor was sullen, nursing his bruised ego. Matriarch Thorne and Trisha were exhausted, their faces etched with simmering, resentful hatred. "The social worker is coming," I announced, my voice low and sharp. "Child Protective Services will be here tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. They have the police report. They have the doctor's images of Skylar's face and my body." The room plunged into absolute silence, followed by instant, crushing panic. "No, the police," Victor stammered, his face going white beneath the dirt. "They'll violate my parole. I'll go back to jail for 5 years. And if you go back to jail, your mother and sister will lose this house and their freedom. They were accessories to child abuse. They shoved socks in my mouth to keep me silent while you were hurting Skylar." I recited the facts of their crimes, showing them that I possessed total knowledge of their guilt. I turned to the 2 women. "If the social worker finds a dirty house, if she finds me scared, or if you tell her a single lie that contradicts the doctor's report, she will take Skylar. And if Skylar is taken, Victor goes to jail. And if Victor goes to jail, I will ensure that the police are given the videos of the 2 of you assaulting me. You will join him." Their terror was palpable. It was no longer about physical pain. It was about the loss of their pathetic, constrained liberty. "You will be the perfect, loving family," I commanded, my voice dripping with scorn. "Victor, you will look remorseful. You will talk about your deep love for Skylar and your struggles with alcohol. Matriarch Thorne, you will gush about your devoted daughter-in-law. Trisha, you will speak of your joy at having a niece. You will save your own lives by saving mine." They spent the entire night scrubbing the house, coaching Victor on his remorseful monologue, unified not by family love, but by paralyzing, mutual fear. The social worker, Ms. Ramirez, was sharp and skeptical. She surveyed the spotless house, the clean, remorseful Victor, the gushing matriarch, and the subdued, quiet Serafina. "I played the role of the scared, hopeful wife perfectly," I told Ms. Ramirez that Victor was trying, that his family was supportive, but that I was still terribly afraid. I handed her a letter I had written, tearfully explaining that I did not want to press charges but only wanted documentation to ensure my daughter's safety if the violence resumed. Ms. Ramirez knew something was deeply wrong. The fear in the family was too rigid, their unity too forced. But she had no evidence of immediate danger. The child was well fed, the house was clean, and the family was unified in their story of repentance. She closed the active intervention but warned the family that the case was subject to indefinite review with mandatory, unannounced visits. The moment the door closed, Matriarch Thorne and Trisha collapsed, weeping tears of genuine, relieved fear. I had protected them from the state, cementing their dependency on my control. "The danger is not gone," I stated, my voice echoing in the sudden silence. "Ms. Ramirez will be back. If she sees a single flaw, you will all lose your freedom. Now get back to work." The trap was fully sprung. The family was immobilized by fear and the state's scrutiny. Serafina's freedom was imminent. My time was complete. I waited another 2 weeks, forcing Victor to work and confiscating every cent of his pay. This money was Serafina's freedom fund. On the scheduled day, I calmly packed Skylar's few clean clothes, secured the cash and the documented evidence, and drove Skylar to the coastal town where I knew Serafina's initial lawyer, Ms. Sharma, maintained a confidential safe house. The goodbye with Skylar was quiet and necessary. I tucked the small note inside her stuffed rabbit. "Mommy had to leave, but I promise I will be back for you very soon." I knew Serafina would find them within hours. I drove back to the city. I placed the final, threatening note on the refrigerator, warning the Thorns that any attempt to pursue Serafina or Skylar would result in the release of the videos and their inevitable incarceration. I then drove straight to Blackwood Ridge. I parked Serafina's battered car and walked to the gate. I was wearing my twins' terrified expression, but my eyes held the absolute conviction of a general returning from a successful campaign. "My name is Allura Thorne," I announced to the startled guard, dropping Serafina's ID on the counter. "I'm checking in." The exchange was chaotic. Serafina, having followed my instructions precisely, telling Dr. Albright that she had fled to save her daughter from an abusive husband, was released on supervised parole almost immediately, aided by Ms. Sharma, who threatened a massive legal suit against the institution for holding an abuse victim. The asylum, fearing the scrutiny of the state and the press over the documented domestic violence, quickly facilitated her release and transfer out of New York. Allura was taken back into custody. The initial charge was unauthorized departure, but the doctors saw the clear evidence of the domestic violence I had secured. My sister was free. I was back where I belonged. The scale of justice had been rebalanced. I was convicted only of a minor parole violation and unauthorized departure, but the court recognized the unique circumstances. The original commitment of 10 years was upheld, but my case was immediately flagged for review. I would serve 4 years in maximum security before being eligible for transfer to a residential treatment center, RTC. Victor Thorne, convicted of felony assault and child abuse, was sentenced to a full 5 years in state prison. The gap was intentional. Serafina would be safe and established long before Victor could pose a threat. My sentence had resumed. My heart, however, was finally free. The following 4 years were spent in a profound internal silence. I was back in the isolation unit at Blackwood Ridge, the cinderblock walls my constant companions. The medical staff, aware of the bizarre, high-stakes identity switch and the violence I had inflicted on Victor, treated me with extreme caution. My sedation was heavily increased, but the pills only dulled my reflexes, never my mind. I spent the years perfecting stillness, counting the patterns in the concrete, and calculating the exact velocity required to neutralize any threat in a confined space. But the emptiness I had carried for so long was finally filled with the quiet certainty of Serafina's freedom. I knew she was safe, thriving, and building a new life for Skylar. That knowledge was my peace. Meanwhile, in the outside world, my actions had created a permanent, destructive consequence for the Thorne family. Victor was serving his 5-year sentence, raging and isolated. Matriarch Thorne and Tricia, crippled by their year of house arrest and crippling community service obligations, had lost the house and most of their assets. Their former lives were completely ruined by the victim they had once tormented. Their hatred for Serafina, the madwoman who had destroyed their world, only grew, but their capacity for action was now nil. They were burdened by endless fines and fear of the law. After 4 years, my case was finally heard before the Commitment Review Board. Ms. Sharma, Serafina's attorney, argued passionately on my behalf, presenting the complete narrative: the desperate abuse, the necessary intervention, and my voluntary return. Serafina, who had now successfully divorced Victor and was living in a different state under the name Evans, provided a compelling testimony. She spoke of my unwavering loyalty, my unique moral compass, and the fact that my violence was only ever aimed at those inflicting pain on the innocent. Allura did not escape her sentence. She paused it to save a life, Ms. Sharma argued to the court. Her actions were calculated, not psychotic. She is a threat only to abusers. The court, swayed by the undeniable evidence of domestic violence and my voluntary self-confinement, agreed to commute the remainder of my commitment. I was not deemed fit for immediate freedom, but I was transferred from the high-security maximum security unit to the Willow Creek Residential Treatment Center, RTC, in upstate New York. It was a halfway house, a transition zone with supervised freedom and reintegration programs. The RTC was structured, clean, and surprisingly quiet. It felt like a minimum security prison with better furniture. I was assigned to Dr. Lena Hansen, a keen, analytical psychiatrist specializing in trauma and controlled aggression. Dr. Hansen immediately recognized the difference between my file and my reality. "You don't lash out, Alara," she observed during one session. "You only retaliate. Your rage is a tool, not a sickness. It's the most disciplined case of explosive disorder I've ever seen." "I learned that chaos is only effective if it is surgically applied," I replied. "And I only apply it when the defenseless cannot defend themselves." My focus was absolute. I immersed myself in the RTC's job skills training program, excelling in courses focused on security, surveillance, and risk assessment. My singular discipline and quiet intensity were assets in this field. I needed to prove, beyond any doubt, that I could function safely in the outside world. After 12 months at the RTC, my parole officer, satisfied by my exemplary behavior and high-level job recommendations, approved my full release. My sentence was officially over. The timing was no accident. I was released exactly 6 months before Victor Thorne was due for his earliest possible parole hearing. The plan was clear. I would be established and ready before he was loose. I did not linger in New York. I took the bus west, the scars of the East Coast fading with every mile. Serafina had prepared my new life meticulously. She had leased a small, furnished apartment for me in a quiet, coastal town in Oregon, Riverwood Bluffs, near her and Schuyler, but far enough away to maintain distance and plausible deniability. The moment I stepped off the bus, the air felt different, clean, smelling of pine and ocean salt. Serafina was waiting. She looked radiant. Gone was the perpetually stooped posture and the hunted look in her eyes. Her hair was lighter, her body was healthy, and her eyes, identical to mine, shone with a quiet, fierce contentment. "Alara," she whispered, rushing forward. We hugged, not the rushed, clandestine embrace of the asylum, but a long, solid press of bodies, two halves finally reunited and whole. "You look well, sister," I murmured. "I am well, thanks to you. Schuyler is magnificent," she talks about Auntie Alara constantly. "She remembers your kindness, not the terror you caused. You are her hero." I allowed myself a rare, genuine smile. "Where is she?" "At the house. She doesn't know you're here today." I wanted this moment. Serafina held my hand tightly. "I fought hard for you, Alara. I used every penny Victor earned while you were dominating him to fund Miss Sharma's appeal. That money bought you this life." "I know, and I am grateful." "Then promise me this, Alara," Serafina insisted, her face growing serious. "No more cages, no more shadows, no more violence. Use your strength to build, not to destroy. Your rage saved us, but peace will define you." "Peace," I repeated, tasting the word. It was a foreign concept, but one I was ready to learn. We drove to the cottage. It was small, green, and surrounded by a towering wall of pine trees. Schuyler, now a bright, curious 8-year-old, ran out immediately. "Auntie Alara," she shrieked, launching herself into my arms. I caught her effortlessly, holding the weight of my victory, the fragile proof of my sacrifice. She was safe, and therefore I was redeemed. I settled into the rhythm of Riverwood Bluffs. I immediately secured a job as a security supervisor for a large timber corporation, Global Wood Holdings. My skills in surveillance, discipline, and perimeter defense were exactly what they needed. The job was lonely, quiet, and perfectly suited to my temperament. I walked the long, forested borders, a silent sentinel again, but this time protecting property, not people. The three of us lived a quiet, normal life for 6 months. The peace was fragile, built on the certainty of distance and the continued confinement of Victor. Then, the calm shattered. One rainy afternoon, 6 months after my release, exactly the time Victor would have become eligible for parole, Serafina received a phone call from an unknown, blocked number. She was frantic when I returned from my shift, clutching the burner phone with shaking hands. It was Victor, she whispered, her face ashen. He got out on early parole. He violated the terms right away. He was drinking. He said he served his time and now it was time for me to pay for mine. He didn't know where we were, but he said he was coming. He promised to find me and he promised to kill the crazy twin first. The ghost of the Thorn House had crossed the continent. The threat was real, imminent, and driven by 5 years of festering, directed hatred. The peace I had built was collapsing. The Sentinel had to return to war. Victor Thorn's parole violation and subsequent threat shattered the delicate ecosystem of peace we had painstakingly cultivated. His return was not unexpected. I had always known that 5 years of confinement would only sharpen his hatred, not dull it. But the call confirmed the immediate danger. I had to assume he was already moving west, fueled by prison rage and a singular focus on revenge. I immediately initiated contingency plans. I drove Serafina and Skylar to a remote, safe location, a secluded rented cabin high in the Cascade Mountains, ensuring absolute radio silence. Serafina was terrified, but her resolve was stronger now. "I won't let him ruin Skylar again, Alara," she declared, her eyes firm despite her shaking hands. "Do what you must, I trust you. Stay quiet." "Stay safe," I instructed, handing her a satellite phone set only to dial local emergency services and Ms. Sharma's office. "I will handle the rest." My first action upon returning to Riverwood Bluffs was to quit my job. I walked into the corporate office of Global Wood Holdings, handed my resignation to the security manager, and walked out. I couldn't risk the corporation's resources or my identity being exposed during a personal conflict. I needed to be untraceable. My mind, however, immediately recognized the strategic advantage Victor had given me. He was hunting us, but he wasn't hunting me, Alara Evans, the security guard. He was hunting Serafina, the crazy twin who had destroyed his life. He would use the resources and contacts of his old life. I took the first available flight back to New York City. I returned to the grimy, familiar streets of the East Side, the place of my greatest victory and my sister's deepest trauma. My goal was simple: locate Victor before he could acquire the necessary resources to track us to Oregon. I knew exactly where to start: his mother and sister, Matriarch Thorn and Trisha. I found them precisely where I expected them to be, working in a perpetual state of bitterness and near poverty. They were mandated to complete years of community service and required to pay restitution, forcing them into miserable minimum-wage jobs at a large, dilapidated city laundromat. Their faces were etched with deep lines of exhaustion and resentment, my lasting legacy. I waited until their late-night shift ended. The alley behind the laundromat was dark, smelling of bleach and cold, stale air. They emerged, hunched and weary. "Matriarch Thorn, Trisha," I said, stepping out of the shadows. Their reaction was instantaneous and visceral. They didn't just gasp, they seized up, their bodies locking in a response born of deep psychological conditioning. They saw the face of the demon who had ruined their lives, the woman they thought was contained in a mental hospital or killed by Victor. It's her," Trisha stammered, dropping her worn canvas bag. Matriarch Thorn's eyes, narrowed by years of bitterness, focused on my face. "You, the crazy witch. Victor said he'd find you first. He swore he'd kill you." "Victor will do neither," I stated, my voice dangerously flat. "He is looking for my sister. He is looking for a victim. He will find neither. I am here to find him. Now you will tell me where he is." I didn't threaten them with physical harm. I used the weapon that had proven most effective: the law and the fear of utter anonymity. "Victor has violated his parole by threatening Serafina and crossing state lines," I explained calmly, reciting the facts. "He is one phone call away from being a permanent fugitive. If he is caught, he will return to prison for a minimum of 10 years. If you help him, you will be charged as accessories to a parole violation and witness intimidation, and you will join him." Their loyalty to Victor, always conditional, crumbled under the weight of their own self-preservation. He didn't tell us where he was staying," Matriarch Thorn insisted, rubbing her thin, weary hands together. "He just showed up. He was talking about going west to California. He's been meeting with old friends, trying to raise money." "Which friends?" Trisha, desperate to rid herself of my presence and Victor's lingering trouble, quickly supplied the information. Sal Marino, he runs a garage down by the old loading docks. Victor said he was crashing there fixing up a truck. He wants to drive straight across the country and ambush them. Sal's garage, I repeated, committing the location to memory. Thank you, Trisha, you chose correctly. I gave them one final binding command: you will not contact Victor. You will not warn him. You will not speak of this encounter to anyone. If you do, I will ensure that the police are given anonymous information linking the two of you to Victor's current whereabouts and a potential plan to flee the state. You will be held for interrogation and your parole will be revoked. Your only chance at survival is absolute silence and utter disappearance from my life. They nodded, tears of fear and relief spilling onto the filthy alley floor. They were broken, enslaved by their own small world of rules and fear of authority. They were no longer a threat, they were collateral. Sal's garage was located near the decaying industrial waterfront, a cold, abandoned structure perfectly suited for hiding a fugitive. I arrived hours before dawn, moving with the premeditated silence of a professional tracker. I assessed the structure. The main bay door was secured with a flimsy lock and a small, high window was open for ventilation. I chose the silent approach. I scaled the adjacent exterior wall of a rusted storage unit, using the decades of my physical training to find purchase in the minute crevices of the brickwork. I slipped through the open window, dropping lightly onto a stack of abandoned tires. The garage was vast, illuminated by a single weak bulb hanging from the ceiling. The air was frigid, smelling of engine oil, cheap booze, and stale resentment. I found Victor sitting alone at a metal desk, his back to me. He was meticulously cleaning a hunting rifle, a dangerous escalation from his typical knife or fist. He looked thinner, harder, but his hands were still unsteady, a legacy of the nerve damage I had inflicted years ago. He was talking to himself, his voice a low, venomous stream. They thought they could hide, he mumbled, wiping the barrel of the gun. That crazy bitch thought she could ruin me. 5 years they took from me, 5 years of my life. I'll take hers and the kids and then I'll find that crazy twin and end her slow. This was it, the absolute confirmation of intent. He was not just threatening, he was actively preparing a lethal cross-country attack. The police could not act fast enough to prevent this. This was my responsibility. I stepped out from behind the stack of tires. My movements were slow, deliberate, yet completely silent. Victor, I said, my voice cutting through the silence like a clean sheet of glass. Your 5 years are over, and so is your life as a free man. He spun around, dropping the rifle with a deafening clang. He didn't see Allura Evans, he saw the vengeful, quiet specter of the asylum. He saw the face of the demon who had ruined him. His shock was absolute. His fear was paralyzing. The confrontation had begun. Victor Thorne scrambled backwards, his face a sickening shade of white, his eyes darting wildly between me and the hunting rifle that lay 10 feet away. The rifle was useless. The shock had robbed him of the motor control needed to retrieve it. You're dead. You're supposed to be locked up, he stammered, his body convulsing with primal panic. He was seeing a ghost, a perfect, terrifying echo of the woman who had effortlessly shattered his dominance years ago. I am where I need to be, I corrected him, moving slowly forward, closing the space between us. You broke your agreement, Victor. You threatened my sister and my niece. You are preparing to attack the innocent. This is unacceptable. He found a desperate surge of adrenaline. He lunged for a heavy wrench lying on the workbench. It was a crude, heavy weapon intended for blunt trauma. He swung it wide, aiming for my head, a clumsy, rage-fueled attempt to end the nightmare. I met the attack with the trained indifference of an elite specialist. I did not block the swing. I moved inside it, flowing under the arc of the wrench. As his arm went past my shoulder, I seized his wrist with both hands. I applied a short, sharp twisting motion, using his momentum against him. The wrench clattered onto the concrete floor. Victor cried out, the pain a high-pitched, pathetic sound. I drove my knee sharply into his abdomen, not to incapacitate him, but to steal his breath and anchor him in place. I then exerted pressure on his damaged wrist, the one I had crippled years ago. The fresh, agonizing pain was a direct reminder of the power I wielded. "Stop struggling, Victor," I commanded, my voice barely above a whisper yet vibrating with immutable authority. "You are beaten. You were beaten the moment you chose violence over peace. Your 5 years of confinement only made you predictable." I slammed him back against a cold, greasy metal storage shelf. The impact knocked the last shreds of fight out of him. He hung there, supported by my iron grip, his breath coming in ragged, terrified gasps. "Listen closely," I said, leaning in. "The state gave you 5 years to reform. You chose revenge. Now you forfeit your freedom. I am not offering you a choice between prison and my silence. I am offering you a choice between total, permanent obliteration or a lifetime of fear." I tightened my grip slightly and he choked out a whimper. "Choice 1, I walk out of this garage right now and call the police. You are a parole violator found with an unregistered hunting rifle, actively planning a cross-state felony. You will return to prison for a minimum of 10 years on top of your parole violation. You will be an old, broken man when you are finally released, but you will still carry the virus of hate, and you will still look for Serafina." I paused, allowing the gravity of the potential years behind bars to sink in. "Choice 2, you vanish. You leave this garage tonight. You change your name, burn your IDs, and get on the first bus heading south to Tijuana. You become a non-person. You live the rest of your life looking over your shoulder, knowing that if you ever breach the border again, if you ever contact any member of the Evans family, ever, I will find you. And when I find you, Victor, I will not call the police. You will simply cease to exist. You saw what I did to you when I was a terrified wife. Imagine what I will do to you now that I am a determined sentinel." His eyes were filled with a raw, agonizing choice. He understood the chilling clarity of my threat. Prison was predictable, annihilation was not. He realized the fear I offered was far more potent and effective than any state-mandated sentence. "I'll go," he stammered, tears mixing with sweat and dirt on his face. "I'll go, I won't come back. I swear it, I'll disappear, just let me go." I held him for a moment longer, ensuring the complete, utter psychological collapse. I needed to know that the threat was not merely neutralized but terminated at the root. "You have 2 hours, I concluded, releasing him with a final, hard push that sent him sprawling onto the floor. "If you are still in this city by sunrise, I will assume you chose the first option." I walked over to the workbench, picked up the hunting rifle, and systematically dismantled it, tossing the parts into a nearby vat of used motor oil. The potential weapon was rendered harmless. I glanced at Victor, who was already scrambling for a jacket and a small bag, driven by blinding terror. I walked out of Sal's garage, leaving the bay door slightly ajar. I did not call the police. I did not need to. I made an anonymous call to the local bus depot, confirming the purchase of a one-way ticket to the Mexican border. Victor Thorne had chosen permanent, self-imposed exile. He was no longer a predator, he was a terrified ghost. I returned to Oregon that same day, the exhaustion of the cross-country operation heavy on my body. I found Serafina and Skylar at the cabin. The moment she saw me, Serafina knew it was finished. Is he dead?" Serafina asked, her voice barely a whisper, afraid of the answer. "No," I replied, sinking into a chair. "He's running. He forfeited his freedom and his identity. He will spend the rest of his life fearing my return more than he ever desired revenge. He is gone, Serafina. Permanently." "You are safe now." Serafina collapsed onto the floor, wrapping her arms around my knees, weeping tears of pure, unadulterated relief. The nightmare that had plagued her for a decade was finally, utterly over. We returned to Riverwood Bluffs. The cottage felt lighter, cleaner, the air purged of the latent threat. I settled back into my routine, but my purpose had changed. My skills were no longer needed for offense or defense, they were needed for empowerment. I used the savings from my security job to buy into a small, struggling martial arts studio in town. I renamed it the Sentinel Academy. I focused exclusively on teaching self-defense to women and young girls. I taught them my techniques, how to use precise pressure, momentum, and stillness against brute force. I taught them that strength was found in the mind, not the fist. I was fulfilling Serafina's original plea, to use my capacity for controlled violence to build, not destroy. I was no longer an avenging angel, I was a teacher of self-sovereignty. For 2 years, we lived in absolute, cherished peace. The ghost of Victor Thorne had dissolved into the white noise of life. Then, the final, festering wound of the Thorne family sent its message. One calm afternoon, while I was organizing the studio, a heavy, anonymous package arrived. It was addressed simply to E. Evans. Inside, wrapped in plain brown paper, were 2 items: a tarnished, slightly bent iron ladle, the same weapon matriarch Thorne had once wielded against Serafina in a fit of rage, and a recent, blurry, zoomed-in photograph of Skylar, laughing while riding her bicycle near the local town park. Scrawled across the back of the photograph in shaky, bitter script was one single, chilling word: accounting. This was not Victor. This was the long, slow, burning hatred of matriarch Thorne and Tricia. They had not forgiven the loss of their comfortable cruelty. They had not forgotten the humiliation of years of forced labor and poverty. They had found us, and they were ready to collect their price. The final confrontation was not with the predator, but with the poison. The arrival of the package, the bent ladle, and the photograph of Skylar was a calculated act of psychological warfare. It was designed to achieve what Victor's threats could not: break our newly established peace through chronic, creeping anxiety. The message, accounting, was a clear demand for restitution for the years of servitude and humiliation I had inflicted upon matriarch Thorne and Tricia. I immediately recognized the motivation. Victor had been driven by primal rage. His mother and sister were driven by petty entitlement and festering bitterness. They believed they deserved to return to their former privilege, and they blamed Serafina, the crazy twin, for their current poverty. My response had to be immediate, decisive, and final. I was not going to allow them to subject my family to indefinite, paralyzing fear. I found Serafina in the garden, and her face went white the moment she saw the ladle. When I showed her the photograph of Skylar, the color left her cheeks entirely. "They're watching her, Alara," Serafina choked out, clutching my arm. "They're still obsessed. We have to call the police." "We have to tell them everything?" "No police," I stated firmly, my mind already operating on pure strategy. "Restraining orders are paper. They only work on people who respect boundaries. Matriarch Thorne and Tricia believe they are victims of a cosmic injustice. They are seeking to restore their control through slow terror, making us run again. If we involve the law, we invite investigation, lengthy court battles, and years of paralyzing uncertainty. Skylar's peace would be shattered." "Then what is the alternative?" she pleaded. "You can't just hunt them down again. They'll know to expect you. They expect us to hide, Serafina. They expect us to panic, to move, to call a lawyer. I will give them the opposite." I walked to my office, retrieving the original burner phone and the last stored number, the one I knew the Thornes used for all their criminal communications. I wrote a note on a clean sheet of paper, ensuring the handwriting was precise, firm, and undeniably mine. "I received your accounting. I agree to the terms. No police, no lawyers. Come to the Sentinel Academy at midnight on the 3rd day from the date of this message. Come alone, I am waiting, E.S. Evans." I took a photograph of the note and sent it via a secure network connection to the burner number. I then systematically wiped and destroyed the phone. The communication was untraceable but undeniable. "I have invited them to my territory," I explained to Serafina. "They want a private settlement in exchange for their lost years, perhaps money, perhaps something worse. I have offered them a structured, controlled environment to achieve their goal. They are not brave enough to risk a random ambush, but they are arrogant enough to believe they can defeat me on my turf." "Midnight on the 3rd day," Serafina whispered, her eyes wide with a familiar but now directed fear. "What did you offer them?" "The final lesson, Serafina, the permanent erasure of their existence as a threat. They joined Victor in his hunt. They will join him in his shadow." My preparations were immediate. I sent Serafina and Skylar to a remote, family-friend's farm in eastern Washington, ensuring they were completely off-grid. The isolation was necessary for their safety and my singular focus. I spent the next 2 days turning the Sentinel Academy into a meticulous, inescapable trap. The main dojo was a large, open, pristine space, perfect for visibility and control. I installed micro cameras in the ventilation shafts, linking them to a concealed server in the office. I didn't need proof for the police, I needed comprehensive, real-time tactical awareness. I studied their probable approach. They would be stealthy, relying on the cover of darkness and the element of surprise. They were unlikely to carry firearms, as that involved complex travel and legal risk. Their weapons would be close quarters and designed for silent subjugation. I secured the building's perimeter, ensuring that the only viable entry point was the front door, which I left unlocked but secured with a subtle internal pressure sensor that would alert me the instant the door opened. The back exit, leading to the alley, was discreetly barricaded. I was funneling them into my kill zone. I did not arm myself. My body, conditioned by 10 years of institutional training and daily practice, was the only weapon I needed. A weapon carries intent, my hands carried only technique. I ate sparingly, slept in 1-hour cycles, and spent the waiting time in the center of the dojo, meditating on stillness. I had to shed the identity of Alara Evans, the peaceful teacher, and reclaim the perfect, emotionless focus of Alara Thorne, the sentinel. The alarm triggered at 1:45 a.m. on the third night. The soft, internal pressure sensor on the front door emitted a single, inaudible chime in my earpiece. I stood perfectly still in the center of the dojo, illuminated by the faint, diffused light from the street lamps outside. I wore my simple black gi, the uniform of absolute discipline. The front door slid open just enough for the two figures to slip inside. They moved with the conspiratorial, awkward stealth of amateurs, their eyes wide and searching in the gloom. Matriarch Thorne, heavier and more bitter, led the way. Trisha, thin and angular with malice, trailed behind. They were both dressed in dark clothing, their faces grim and set with the conviction of their righteous victimhood. "Alara, we know you're here, you little witch." Matriarch Thorne hissed, her voice dry and rasping with years of internalized resentment. "You took everything, the house, the money, Victor, you pay for our time." Trisha stopped and pulled out her weapon, a long, heavy-duty electrical cord, coiled and ready for strangulation. Matriarch Thorne produced a crude, homemade blackjack, a sock filled with rocks, a blunt force weapon designed to cause concussion. Their intent was absolute subjugation, not a fair fight. I allowed them to advance. I waited until they were positioned perfectly in the center of the mats, their shadows stretching long and distorted in the weak light. "I am right here," I said, my voice cutting through the silence, calm and deep. They both froze, recognizing the stillness, the quiet command that had paralyzed them years ago. They turned slowly, facing my silhouette. "You accepted my invitation," I stated, my eyes gleaming in the dark. "You crossed 3,000 miles to attack me in my home. That proves you are not merely seeking payment but destruction, and that is a mistake." Matriarch Thorne, driven by pure, incandescent hatred, shrieked and lunged first, swinging the heavy blackjack in a wide, powerful arc toward my face. The action was slow to my perception. I did not move my feet. I leaned back slightly, letting the blackjack whistle inches from my chin. As the weapon passed, I executed a flawless internal technique, simultaneously sweeping my hand up to deflect the matriarch's elbow and stepping forward into her space. The impact was not one of strength, but one of precise directional force. Matriarch Thorne's momentum immediately became her prison. She stumbled forward, her balance gone. I caught her wrist, applied a single, sharp twist, and she collapsed to the mat with a groan, the blackjack rolling away uselessly. Her rage was instantly subdued by crippling pain and shock. Trisha, seeing her mother fall, lunged with the coiled electrical cord, aiming for my neck. She was faster than her mother, fueled by years of bitter envy. The cord looped around my throat. The constriction was immediate. I felt the familiar, uncomfortable pressure, but my mind remained detached, analytical. I knew the exact microsecond I had before hypoxia set in. I drove my elbow back, not to hit, but to disorient, creating a half-second of slack. I then executed the technique of a master. I dropped my center of gravity, simultaneously seizing her hand and pressing my thumb with immense, targeted pressure against the vagus nerve in her neck. The effect was instantaneous and total. Trisha's eyes glazed over, her muscles seized up, and she dropped the cord. I released the pressure and pushed her away. She crumpled onto the mat, convulsing slightly, utterly neutralized. I stood over them, breathing steadily. The chaos had lasted less than 10 seconds. The only sounds were their ragged whimpers of pain and the distant, constant hum of the refrigerator in the break room. I looked down at the two defeated figures. They were no longer dangerous. They were simply miserable, broken people. The poison had been successfully purged. I stood in the center of the Sentinel Academy, the faint morning light just beginning to filter through the high windows, illuminating the two figures writhing on the mat. Matriarch Thorne was clutching her wrist, sobbing quietly, while Trisha was slowly coming back to consciousness, her breathing shallow and ragged. Their attempt at lethal vengeance had ended in their utter, immediate defeat. I retrieved the electrical cord and the homemade blackjack, dropping them onto my desk. I ensured the internal cameras had successfully recorded the entire 5 minutes of the confrontation, not for legal use, but as documentation of my own strategic purity. I walked back to the mats and stood over Matriarch Thorne. My voice was calm, measured, and final, embodying the absolute authority of a judge handing down an immutable sentence. You crossed the country. You planned physical harm against me and my family, I stated. You sought to undo the peace I purchased with years of confinement. Your hatred is a terminal disease, and I am the only cure. Matriarch Thorne looked up at me, the years of bitter entitlement replaced by the abject, overwhelming terror that had dominated her life in the Thorne house. Please, Alara, she whimpered, using my true name, recognizing the distinction between the victim and the sentinel. We just wanted the money back. We're ruined. We're working 3 jobs. We can't live like this. That is precisely your sentence, I corrected her. You are living exactly as you deserve. You tormented the innocent for 10 years. You deserve the hardship you earned. I then dropped 2 documents onto the mat. A pristine, official-looking document detailing the status of Victor Thorne as a permanent fugitive and a clean sheet of paper on which I had written my final decree. Victor Thorne chose exile. He is a ghost running from the law and from me, I explained. You too will now join him. Your confrontation tonight confirms your continued dangerous intent. If I call the police now, you will face felony charges and you will both be in prison for the next decade. And when you get out, your hatred will remain and you will repeat this cycle. I knelt down, forcing eye contact. I will not allow you to remain a threat. You have one option: disappear. Tonight, you will leave Oregon and you will never return. You will change your names, burn all your legal documents, and you will live in constant, agonizing fear of my surveillance. If you ever contact a member of the Evans family again, if you ever step foot in this state, I will find you. And when I find you, I will not call the police. I will personally ensure that your existence is terminated quietly and irrevocably. I gestured to Trisha, who was now awake and staring at me with the absolute, paralyzed terror I had seen in Victor. You too will live as ghosts, forever haunted by the peace you tried to destroy. You will carry the burden of the sentinel, always looking over your shoulder. I offered the ultimate leverage. Furthermore, if you are caught by the authorities now, you will immediately be linked to Victor's disappearance. You will be primary suspects in a missing person case, and the police will investigate you for conspiracy and murder. Your only safety is in absolute, complete anonymity. The finality of the choice was overwhelming. They could face certain, long-term incarceration and possible implication in murder, or they could choose a lifetime of fear-driven anonymity. For the Thornes, the loss of their comfortable identity and the terror of my silent retribution was a fate worse than prison. Matriarch Thorne, her voice reduced to a dry, broken whisper, nodded. We'll go, we'll vanish, we swear it. We won't come back. Good, I replied, standing up and retrieving the recording chip from the ventilation shaft. The negotiation is complete. I waited until I heard the desperate squeak of their car tires fleeing the alley. I checked the cameras one last time to confirm their flight path led away from the city. They were gone, exiled by their own hatred and my strategic cruelty. I drove immediately to eastern Washington, the long, quiet miles allowing the emotional residue of the confrontation to dissipate. I needed to see Serafina and Skylar. I needed to reconnect with the peace I had fought so hard to protect. I found them at the remote farm. Serafina rushed out, her anxiety overwhelming. What happened, Alara? Did they leave? They left, I confirmed, pulling her into a tight, reassuring embrace. The threat is terminated. Victor is running. His mother and sister are running. The Thorne family no longer exists as a coherent entity. You are safe, Serafina, truly and permanently safe. Serafina searched my eyes, looking for any lingering darkness, finding only the exhaustion of a successful mission. She took a deep, shuddering breath, the first truly peaceful one in decades. You saved us, she whispered, leaning her forehead against mine. Again. You are the only person capable of this kind of absolute protection. We drove back to Riverwood Bluffs. The cottage and the studio now felt completely secure, cleansed of the final taint of the past. The Sentinel could finally relinquish her post. The following months were dedicated to integrating back into the life of peace. I sold my ownership stake in the martial arts studio, deciding that my physical intensity had served its purpose. I transitioned my work entirely to consulting and risk assessment for local businesses, a quiet, analytical role perfectly suited to my focus, requiring no physical force. The constant need for vigilance dissolved, replaced by a profound, deep serenity. My rage, once a weapon, became simply a memory, a sharp tool placed back in its sheath, never to be drawn again. The true healing began with Serafina. She was thriving, her jewelry business expanding rapidly. She was no longer just surviving, she was flourishing, a testament to the power of earned peace. One rainy afternoon, Serafina called me into the small study she used as her workshop. She held a crisp, official-looking document. This is the last piece of administrative work, she said softly, her eyes shining. I filed it 2 years ago, but it just came through. It's the final seal on our freedom. The document was a court order from the state of Oregon officially changing our names. It read, Alara Evans, formerly Thorne, officially changes her full name to Alara Serafina Evans. Serafina Evans, formerly Thorne, officially changes her full name to Serafina Alara Evans. I looked at her, stunned. Why, Serafina? It complicates everything. Because you were the darkness that protected my light, and I was the light that allowed your redemption, Alara, she explained, taking my hand. We are two sides of the same coin. I want you to carry my name so you never forget the peace you fought for, and I want to carry yours so I never forget the strength that saved us. We are whole now. The Sentinel and the peace are one. The gesture was the most profound act of forgiveness and unification I had ever experienced. It was the complete acceptance of my dangerous history as a necessary component of our shared future. My identity was no longer defined by the cage, but by the sister who loved me. I smiled, a rare, unreserved expression of joy. Alara Serafina Evans, I repeated, tasting the name. It is perfect. With the Thorne family completely neutralized and our identities unified, the next phase of life in Riverwood Bluffs was marked by uneventful, continuous prosperity. The absence of fear was the greatest luxury we owned. Serafina Alara Evans flourished. Her jewelry business expanded beyond online sales. She opened a small boutique shop downtown. Her meticulous, focused attention to detail, once used to track Victor's behavior, was now channeled into crafting delicate, high-end pieces. She was happy, financially secure, and finally able to dedicate herself fully to her artistry. Skylar, now a well-adjusted teenager, excelled in school. She knew the broad strokes of our past, the bad marriage, the crazy uncle, and the Auntie Alara who had saved them. She carried no trauma, only the quiet gratitude that comes from being protected absolutely. Her perception of me, Alara Serafina Evans, was one of quiet, formidable competence. I was the one who could teach her how to change a tire, navigate by the stars, and crucially, how to disarm a threat with minimal effort. My consulting business, specializing in proprietary risk analysis and internal security audits, was thriving. My ability to see patterns, predict weakness, and assess threat vectors, all skills honed in my confinement and survival, made me an invaluable, if slightly eccentric, professional in the corporate security field. I worked mostly from home, maintaining my chosen anonymity. However, the real legacy of the Sentinel lay in the Sentinel Academy, which I still visited regularly, though I no longer owned it. I had sold the business to Maya, the young student who had once asked me about stillness in chaos. I maintained an advisory role and I continued to teach the advanced self-defense class for women and teens. My teaching had evolved beyond mere technique. I taught emotional sovereignty. Rage is a lightning strike. It is powerful but uncontrollable, I would tell my students, standing in the center of the mat. Fear is paralysis. You cannot fight with either. You must achieve absolute stillness, a state where your mind sees the threat and calculates the response without emotional interference. Your goal is not to win the fight. Your goal is to end the fight as quickly and efficiently as possible, allowing you to return to peace. The techniques were harsh, targeting nerves, joints, and tendons, but the philosophy was restorative. I was teaching them how to be their own sentinel, ensuring they would never be forced into a situation like Serafina's. In 2030, 5 years after the final confrontation, a significant event occurred that confirmed the permanence of my peace. I received a certified letter from the New York State Parole Board forwarded through Ms. Sharma. The letter was a legal formality, the final declaration on the case of Victor Thorne. After years of failed contact, missed check-ins, and overwhelming evidence of a deliberate border crossing, facilitated by the anonymous tip I had given years prior, Victor Thorne was officially declared a permanent fugitive and a wanted criminal. The case was closed, removing all legal ambiguity regarding his future return. He could not claim time served, and he could never legally re-enter the United States without facing immediate maximum incarceration. The closure brought no sense of triumph, only a quiet, resolute finality. The threat was not just gone, it was legally exiled. A few months later, I received a small, unsolicited communication that spoke volumes about the fate of matriarch Thorne and Tricia. It was a newspaper clipping mailed from an obscure post office box in a small, isolated border town in Arizona. The article was small, reporting on the arrest of 2 women, identified as Jane Doe 1 and Jane Doe 2, who were picked up by Border Patrol agents attempting to cross into the U.S. illegally from Mexico. They were found with forged documents, attempting to re-establish a life across the border. They were being held as material witnesses for further investigation. There was no mention of the names Thorne, Evans, or the murder investigation I had alluded to years ago. But the details were clear. They were attempting to escape the constant, crushing fear of anonymity I had imposed. They were caught. They were in the legal system, but not in mine. My final, terrifying sentence, eternal self-imprisonment, had been executed. They had broken their vow of silence, and the resulting chaos had consumed them. I burned the clipping. The chapter was unequivocally shut. The year 2035 arrived, marked by Skylar's high school graduation. She was preparing to leave for college on the East Coast, ironically returning to the state where the whole saga had begun, but doing so as a free, confident young woman. On the night before she left, Serafina and I sat with Skylar in the living room, a final moment of quiet before her departure. Skylar looked between the two of us, her eyes thoughtful. "Mom, Auntie Alara," she began, taking a deep breath. "I know everything." We exchanged glances, our faces reflecting the quiet resignation that comes when a long-held truth must finally be spoken. "We knew you suspected things, Skylar," Serafina said gently. "But there are things we didn't want you to carry." "I know the full story," Skylar insisted. "Not from you, but from the court records Mom kept and from Ms. Sharma. I read the original filings, the assault reports, and Auntie Alara's transfer records. I know Auntie Alara went to the asylum, came back as you, destroyed Victor, and then went back into custody so you could be released and start over." She paused, looking directly at me. "Auntie Alara, you were the villain so Mom could be the victim who survived. You paid for our freedom with 10 years of your life twice." I met her gaze, offering no defense, only acceptance. "It was necessary, Skylar. I regretted the pain, but not the action." Skylar reached out and took both of our hands. "That's why you are my hero. But you are not just the sentinel anymore, Auntie Alara, you are also the peace." She pulled out a small, velvet box. Inside were 3 matching, intricately braided silver necklaces, pendants of a sailor's knot, famously difficult to untangle once tied. "It's a sister knot," Skylar explained. "It represents an unbreakable bond, a defense that relies on unity. You two tied yourselves together to save me. I want you to wear it always." Serafina immediately put hers on, tears in her eyes. I took mine, feeling the cool, solid weight of the silver in my palm. It was the physical representation of my new name, Alara Serafina Evans, the fusion of the protector and the protected. I placed the necklace around my neck. The knot rested against my sternum, a permanent reminder that my violence was over and my peace was secured. The next 2 years were the most peaceful of my life. Skylar was away at college, thriving and sending enthusiastic emails about her studies and newfound independence. Serafina and I settled into the quiet, deep companionship of two people who had faced utter destruction together and emerged unified. Our home was not just safe, it was a sanctuary defined by shared purpose and hard-won freedom. I used my free time to delve deeper into the philosophical roots of my own actions. I started writing a monograph, a detailed analysis of controlled aggression and the ethical responsibilities of a protector. I termed my concept controlled sentinelism, the application of extreme, calculated force only when required to restore sovereignty to the defenseless, followed by the immediate cessation of that force once parity is achieved. The work was therapeutic, allowing me to process my decade of institutionalization and my acts of violence as necessary defense mechanisms, rather than mere expressions of rage. One afternoon, Dr. Lena Hansen, my former therapist from the RTC and now a professional colleague, contacted me. She was writing a paper on the rehabilitation of violent trauma survivors and wanted to use my case anonymously, of course, as a success model. We spoke for hours via secure video link. "Alara, Dr. Hansen said, her eyes kind but penetrating. "When you first arrived at the RTC, I categorized you as an apex protector, someone whose self-worth was inextricably linked to the protection of a vulnerable target. You could not stop until the threat was not just gone, but permanently exiled. You were always ready to pay the ultimate cost." "The cost was necessary," I replied simply, adjusting the silver knot necklace. "Serafina and Skylar deserved a life without the constant threat of violence. My own freedom was secondary to their sovereignty. But you went beyond protection, Alara. You performed the function of the state. You incarcerated Victor, exiled matriarch Thorne and Trisha, and created a private judicial system based entirely on fear. Do you ever regret that you didn't allow the legal system to finish the job?" I paused, considering the complexity of the question. The legal system is built on proof and procedure. It offers rehabilitation, not finality. It would have offered Victor another chance, another parole, another opportunity to return. The Thorne family's hatred was a chronic infection. I applied a surgical cure. I regret the necessity, not the outcome. They chose their fate through their own actions. I merely dictated the precise, inevitable consequence. "And the cost to you?" Dr. Hansen pressed. "I lost 10 years of my life. I gained a purpose," I stated. I was an aggressive, unstable woman trapped in a cage. Now I am Alara Serafina Evans, a person defined by the peace I secured, not the violence I committed. The greatest cost was my identity, but that loss ultimately led to my true self. Dr. Hansen smiled sadly. "That is the definition of sovereign freedom, Alara. You took back control of the narrative, not just the physical space." The quiet years allowed Serafina and me to engage in the delicate, crucial work of emotional reconciliation. One evening, while working late in her studio, Serafina brought up the core issue, the 10 years I had lost in her place. "I think about it every day, Alara," she confessed, carefully polishing a new silver pendant. "The time you spent in the cold while I was free. I know you say it was necessary, but I stole your life." "You took safety, Serafina," I corrected her, sitting beside her. "The life I had with Victor was not mine, it was a cage. The asylum was merely a different, more structured cage. My time there allowed me to focus, to hone my mind without external distraction. It was a trade, not a theft. And you paid me back with this." I gestured around the small, warm, lamplit studio, heavy with the scent of metal and creativity. "You paid me back with the trust of your daughter, the peace of this house, and the shared name. Your light is my redemption. Do not carry guilt for the necessary sacrifice." Serafina reached out and traced the intricate knot on my necklace. I will never stop being grateful for the Sentinel, but I am even more grateful for the sister. This was the final absolution. The shadow of the past was not gone, but it had been converted into a source of mutual strength and profound understanding. In 2037, Schuyler graduated from college with a degree in criminal justice. Her final thesis was dedicated to me, The Ethics of Necessary Intervention, examining the boundaries of self-sovereignty. She returned home to Riverwood Bluffs for a celebration that included Dr. Hanson and Ms. Sharma, the two key figures who had understood the mechanics of our freedom. At the dinner table, Ms. Sharma raised her glass. To the Evans family, she toasted. A family that taught us that sometimes the only way to achieve justice is to step outside the law and reclaim your own sovereignty. And to the Sentinel Academy, Dr. Hanson added, nodding toward me. Alara has built more than a school. She has built a legacy of peace that ensures no future victim needs to resort to such extreme measures. I looked at Schuyler, bright, laughing, and utterly whole. I looked at Serafina, serene and powerful in her earned happiness. The work was complete. The Sentinel was a teacher now. Later that evening, as the celebration wound down, I stood on the porch, looking out at the quiet, forested neighborhood. I saw no shadows, heard no threats, and felt only the gentle breeze of a peaceful night. My phone, the secure line I maintained for consulting, chimed. It was an email from Maya, my student who now owned the Sentinel Academy. Alara, I wanted to tell you something wonderful. I have been accepted into the State Police Academy. I will use the techniques you taught me not to fight, but to de-escalate and protect. I want to be a sentinel of the state, ensuring that the law serves the innocent. I smiled, a slow, profound feeling of satisfaction settling in my chest. I replied with 3 simple words. Go with peace. I hung up the phone and walked back inside towards Serafina and Schuyler. I was no longer the sentinel in the shadows. I was home. The years continued to blend into a cycle of peace and productivity. Riverwood Bluffs remained our unbreachable sanctuary. The concept of home was no longer a location, but the psychological space defined by the mutual safety of Alara, Serafina, and Schuyler. My consulting work expanded, focusing increasingly on complex litigation support where I applied my specialized analytical skills, my ability to map out threat trajectories and predict human failure points, to corporate risk assessments. This work kept my mind sharp and disciplined, channeling the need for absolute control into constructive, legitimate enterprise. Serafina Alara Evans became a local success story. Her jewelry boutique, named the Unbreakable Knot, became known for its signature piece, the silver sailor's knot pendant, inspired by Schuyler's graduation gift. The shop was a quiet, potent symbol of her transformation, beauty and artistry forged from deep adversity. In 2040, Schuyler, having completed her legal studies, was accepted into the U.S. Attorney's Office for an internship, signaling her intent to pursue a career in prosecution. She was determined to use the system to ensure that abusers like Victor Thorne could never slip through the cracks. Her work was the final validation of my intervention. The Sentinel's sacrifice had created a new generation committed to lawful protection. The final act of closure came not through violence, but through a piece of historical truth. During a routine security audit of a client's digital archive, I stumbled upon a highly encrypted, years-old file originating from the New York Police Department's Cold Case Division. My professional curiosity and a deep-seated need for absolute assurance compelled me to access it. The file was titled, Unsolved Disappearance, Thorne, Victor, Matriarch, Tricia. The file detailed the simultaneous disappearance of all 3 Thornes, noting Victor's parole violation and the subsequent flight risk of the mother and sister 2 years later. The police had meticulously gathered evidence, including the testimony of Sal Marino from the garage, who had reluctantly confessed to Victor's plan to flee the country, and the brief, chaotic records of Matriarch Thorne and Tricia's capture near the Arizona border. The file concluded with a final, unchangeable assessment. The Thorne family was considered voluntarily absent, likely in self-imposed exile in Mexico or Central America, avoiding criminal liability. The case was archived as cold, with no further investigative resources allocated. The truth was laid bare. My engineered exile was not merely effective, it had been ratified and accepted by the legal apparatus I had initially bypassed. The law had, in its own way, confirmed the efficacy of the Sentinel's justice. They were not dead, they were simply erased. I quietly closed the file, leaving no trace of my access. There was no joy, only a profound, silent relief that the enemy was not just defeated, but officially deemed irrelevant. The true measure of my peace was that I no longer needed to maintain the persona of the Sentinel. I could finally embrace the Serafina side of my identity, the capacity for warmth, joy, and deep connection. I started a new tradition with Serafina. Every year on the anniversary of my release from the RTC, we would take a quiet trip back to the coast, spending a day in silent reflection. On our 10th anniversary of freedom, we walked along the quiet, windswept beach near our first temporary safe house. The sun was setting, casting long, peaceful shadows across the sand. "Do you ever think about the alternative?" Serafina asked softly, linking her arm through mine. "What if you hadn't gone back to the asylum? What if we had just run?" "We would still be running," I replied, feeling the cool weight of the silver knot on my chest. Victor would have pursued us. The hatred would have followed us. We would have spent our lives looking over our shoulders, perpetually confined by fear. We would never have become who we are now. And who are we now? I stopped and looked at her, her face reflecting the calm, warm colors of the sunset. "We are Alara Serafina Evans," I said, reciting our shared identity. "I am the woman who learned that true strength is not in the capacity for destruction, but in the discipline to build and preserve peace. And you are the woman who taught me that redemption is possible, even for the most violent of hearts." I reached up and touched the silver knot around her neck, identical to mine. "You freed me from the need to be the Sentinel, Serafina. You gave me the life I didn't know I deserved." Serafina smiled, a genuine, luminous expression that erased every shadow of the past decade. "We saved each other, sister. We are whole now." The final scene is one of absolute finality. It is a summer evening in Riverwood Bluffs. Serafina and I are sitting on the porch swing, watching Skylar, now an accomplished young woman, planting a new rosebush in the garden. She is strong, happy, and entirely untouched by the darkness that preceded her peace. A quiet satisfaction permeates the air. The long war is over. The price was paid in full. The Sentinel had executed her justice, served her time, and earned her peace. I lean back on the swing, the silver knot resting against my heart, the symbol of the unbreakable bond that saved me. I close my eyes, listening to the quiet laughter of my family, and for the first time in my life, I feel the true, total, enduring silence of a peace that is not merely observed, but absolutely secured.